September 18th, 1944, near the Dutch village of Best, Netherlands. 7:12 a.m. The first light of dawn slowly spread across the Dutch countryside. A thick layer of morning fog drifted over the wet grass, hiding the scars of war beneath a blanket of silence. In the distance, artillery rumbled like distant thunder, while frightened birds burst from the trees every few seconds. Hidden beneath carefully arranged branches, Gefreiter Otto Weber, a veteran German sniper, lay completely motionless, his camouflage blended so perfectly with the surrounding bushes that even another sniper would struggle to find him. Resting in his hands was his trusted Carabiner 98K fitted with a telescopic scope, a rifle that had already claimed dozens of lives during the war. Weber slowly scanned the ground ahead. Nearly 300 meters of open farmland stretched before him. There were no buildings, no trenches, no stone walls, and almost no trees. Just tall grass gently swaying in the cold morning wind. To him, it was the perfect battlefield. His orders from headquarters were simple. No American infantry is allowed to cross this field. Weber smiled confidently. From his experience on both the eastern and western fronts, he knew exactly what happened whenever soldiers tried to cross open ground. They panicked, they ran, and the moment they stood up, they became easy targets. He had no doubt the Americans would make the same mistake. But several hundred meters away, 12 soldiers from the 101st Airborne Division were preparing to prove him wrong. Crouched behind a shallow drainage ditch, Staff Sergeant Frank Delgado carefully studied the same field through a pair of binoculars. To an ordinary soldier, the mission looked impossible. To Delgado, the field looked full of opportunities. He lowered the binoculars and quietly looked at his men. No one spoke. Months of brutal training had taught them that the loudest squad rarely survived the longest. Every man checked his equipment one last time. M1 Garand rifles, a Thompson submachine gun, a Browning automatic rifle, smoke grenades, extra ammunition. Everything secured to prevent unnecessary noise. Delgado finally broke the silence. Remember your training. He can't shoot what he can't find. The men nodded. Seconds later, an American helmet slowly appeared above the edge of the ditch. Weber saw it immediately. His breathing slowed. The crosshairs settled perfectly. He squeezed the trigger. Crack! The bullet punched straight through the helmet. But instead of a body collapsing, the helmet simply dropped into the grass. Weber frowned. It had been attached to a stick. The Americans had never intended to sacrifice a soldier. They had only wanted one thing: to make the sniper reveal his position. Behind the ditch, Delgado smiled. There you are, he whispered. The hunt had just begun. The echo of the rifle shot faded across the quiet Dutch countryside. For a few seconds, nothing moved. Otto Weber kept his eye fixed on the scope, waiting for the rest of the American squad to panic. After years on the battlefield, he knew the pattern. One accurate shot usually forced soldiers to duck, run, or reveal themselves while trying to help a wounded comrade. But this time, nothing happened. No shouting, no running, no return fire. The silence itself felt unnatural. Weber slowly scanned the field again. Where are they? He whispered to himself. Behind the drainage ditch, Staff Sergeant Frank Delgado gave a simple hand signal. Immediately, the 12-man squad split into 2 fire teams. No one spoke. Every soldier already knew exactly what to do. The first team would move. The second team would stay behind, watching for any sign of the sniper. Then they would switch. This was the American fire and maneuver tactic, a method drilled into every infantry squad through months of exhausting training. Instead of moving together like one large target, they moved as small, nearly invisible pieces. Private Tommy Evans took a deep breath and slid into the narrow irrigation ditch. Cold, muddy water soaked through his uniform, but he ignored it. The ditch was barely 2 feet deep. It wasn't enough to stand in, but it was enough to hide a crawling soldier. Keeping his rifle close to his chest, Evans crawled forward. 5 meters. Stop. Look. Listen. No shot. Another 5 meters. Stop again. Around him, the tall grass barely moved. From above, he had completely disappeared. Otto Weber adjusted the focus on his scope. Only moments ago, he had counted at least 12 American soldiers. Now! The entire field looked empty. He checked the tree line. Nothing. He checked the ditch. Nothing. He even raised his binoculars for a wider view. Still nothing. It was as if the Americans had simply vanished. His confidence slowly turned into confusion. They can't just disappear. The truth was hiding in plain sight. The Americans weren't crossing the field in a straight line. Instead, Delgado guided his squad diagonally, using every tiny fold in the terrain: a shallow ditch, a slightly raised patch of earth, a line of taller grass, Places that looked useless from a distance became life-saving cover when used correctly. Every movement lasted only a few seconds before another pause. Every pause forced the sniper to search again. Every search wasted precious time. Suddenly, Weber noticed something strange. A small patch of grass moved against the direction of the wind. His eyes narrowed. There! He quickly aimed and fired. Crack! The bullet tore through the grass. Nothing. No scream, no body. He fired again at another movement. Again. Nothing. His heartbeat began to rise. Every time he thought he had found an American, the movement stopped. Then another patch of grass moved somewhere else. It felt like chasing ghosts across an empty battlefield. Meanwhile, Corporal Hayes had already led half, the squad more than 100 meters across the field. Not one German had noticed. Delgado looked toward the distant tree line. Then something caught his attention. A tiny flash of sunlight, just for a fraction of a second. A reflection. A sniper's scope. He quietly pointed toward Private Miller, the squad's bar gunner. Suppress that tree line. Miller nodded. He raised the Browning automatic rifle. The powerful weapon erupted with a short burst. What? Heavy .30-06. Rounds smashed into the trees around Weber's hiding place. Branches snapped. Leaves exploded into the air. Wood splinters flew across the sniper's face. Weber instinctively ducked. His position had been compromised. Every experienced sniper knew the rule. Once the enemy finds your location, move immediately. Without hesitation, he grabbed his rifle and crawled toward another hiding spot deeper inside the woods. For the next few minutes, the deadliest weapon watching the field had fallen completely silent. Delgado smiled. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He looked toward his men and quietly raised his hand. 3 fingers. 2. 1. The entire squad surged forward for the final stretch. Ahead of them, hidden behind sandbags near the edge of the woods, stood the real objective. A deadly German MG-42 machine gun position. The Germans still believed the field in front of them was empty. They had no idea that 12 American paratroopers were already approaching from their blind side. The German MG-42 crew had no reason to worry. For nearly 3 hours, their machine gun had dominated the battlefield. Every burst had forced American troops to stay pinned behind cover, and every report from the sniper confirmed the same thing. The field is clear. The gun commander rested his binoculars on the sandbags and looked across the open ground one more time. Nothing, no American soldiers, no movement. Only tall grass swaying gently in the morning breeze. He allowed himself a confident smile. If they're coming, he said to his assistant gunner, they'll have to come from the front. That assumption would cost them everything. Just 60 meters away, hidden inside a narrow drainage ditch, Staff Sergeant Frank Delgado slowly raised his head. For the first time that morning, he had a clear view of the German position. He counted quickly. 1 machine gunner, 1 assistant gunner feeding ammunition, 3 riflemen guarding the perimeter, 5 men in total. Delgado looked toward Corporal Hayes. No words were needed. Hayes already understood the plan. He silently pointed toward 2 riflemen, then toward the right side of the position. Private Tommy Evans slowly removed a fragmentation grenade from his pouch. His heart pounded against his chest. Months of training had prepared him for this exact moment. Now it was time to trust that training. Far behind the German lines, Sniper Otto Weber finally reached his new hiding position. Breathing heavily, he settled behind another fallen tree and looked through his scope. His stomach tightened. The field still looked empty, but something felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. Then, a distant burst of American rifle fire echoed from somewhere near the woods. Weber immediately swung his scope toward the sound. His eyes widened. American soldiers, not in the field, but beside the German machine gun nest. They're behind us. His voice barely escaped as a whisper. Before anyone inside the German position could react, Delgado dropped his hand. Go! The Americans exploded from the ditch. Private Evans sprinted forward and threw his grenade. It landed perfectly behind the sandbags. A second later, boom! The explosion sent dirt, wood, and equipment flying into the air. The German machine gun crew staggered in confusion. Before the smoke could clear, Corporal Hayes and 2 riflemen rushed straight into the position. The first German reached for his rifle. Too late. A burst from the M1 Garand dropped him instantly. Another soldier tried turning the MG-42 toward the attackers. Private Miller's bar roared before he could fire. The heavy automatic round slammed into the sandbags, forcing the remaining defenders to dive for cover. Within seconds, the Americans were inside the machine gun nest. The brutal weapon that had pinned down an entire battalion all morning suddenly fell silent. Secure it! Delgado shouted. Two paratroopers grabbed the abandoned MG-42 and turned it around. The assistant gunner found an untouched belt of ammunition, still hanging beside the weapon. He slammed it into place. A moment later, the captured machine gun opened fire, this time against the retreating Germans. The unmistakable ripping sound of the MG-42 echoed across the battlefield. German soldiers froze in disbelief. Their own weapon was now firing at them. Confusion spread through the nearby defensive positions. Some soldiers believed the Americans had launched a much larger assault than they actually had. Others began pulling back without waiting for orders. A single 12-man squad had shattered the confidence of an entire section of the German line. From his distant hiding place, Otto Weber watched the unbelievable scene unfold. American soldiers stood inside the very position he had been protecting. The machine gun was gone. German troops were retreating. The open field, the same field he had sworn no one could cross, had already been crossed. Not by tanks, not by overwhelming numbers, but by 12 disciplined infantrymen who had refused to become easy targets. For the first time in years, Weber realized he hadn't been defeated by better weapons. He had been defeated by better tactics. And as more American troops began advancing safely across the now silent field, one thought echoed through his mind. The field was never empty. I was simply looking for the wrong things. As Otto Weber lowered his rifle, the battlefield looked completely different. Only 30 minutes earlier, that same stretch of farmland had seemed impossible to cross. It was nothing more than open ground, a sniper's dream, where every movement should have been easy to spot. Now, American soldiers were moving confidently across it. More squads followed the same path Delgado's men had taken, advancing in short, controlled bounds instead of charging forward. One fire team moved while the other covered. Then they switched. Every man knew exactly when to crawl, when to stop, and when to stay perfectly still. From a distance, it looked almost effortless. But in reality, it was the result of months of relentless training. Lieutenant Karl Brenner arrived at the destroyed MG-42, position only minutes later. The sandbags were torn apart. Spent shell casings covered the ground. The machine gun that had defended the German line all morning was gone. He looked back toward the open field and shook his head in disbelief. There should be bodies out there. Instead, there was only grass. No obvious trail. No signs of a massive assault. It was as if the Americans had appeared out of thin air. But they hadn't. They had simply understood something the Germans underestimated. An open field isn't truly open if you know how to use every inch of it. A shallow ditch, a slight depression in the earth, a line of taller grass, even a few seconds of patience. Individually, those things meant very little. Together, they could make an entire squad almost impossible to track. By late 1944, encounters like this were becoming increasingly common across Western Europe. German after-action reports frequently described American infantry as disappearing in terrain that seemed to offer no cover at all. The reality was far less mysterious. The U.S. Army had refined its infantry tactics. Through hard lessons in North Africa, Sicily, and Normandy, soldiers were taught never to move as one large target. Instead, they advanced in small teams, constantly covering one another, while making the enemy search for dozens of tiny movements instead of one obvious attack. For a sniper looking through a narrow scope, that made all the difference. Every time he focused on one patch of grass, another soldier was already moving somewhere else. Every second spent searching was another second the Americans gained. Staff Sergeant Frank Delgado gathered his squad before they continued the advance. 12 men had started the mission. 12 men were still standing. Mud covered their uniforms. Their boots were soaked. Their faces were exhausted. But they had accomplished what many believed was impossible. Without tanks, without overwhelming artillery, without sacrificing half the squad. They had crossed a field that every German defender believed no infantry could survive. History often celebrates famous commanders like Patton, Eisenhower, and Montgomery. But battles were rarely won by generals alone. More often, they were decided by ordinary soldiers making disciplined decisions under extraordinary pressure. A squad leader who trusted his training. A bar gunner who fired at exactly the right moment. A young private who crawled through freezing mud instead of running across open ground. Small actions, perfectly timed. Working together. As the morning sun burned away the last of the fog, Otto Weber took one final look through his scope. The Americans were no longer hidden. They didn't need to be. They had already broken through. He slowly lowered his rifle and understood the truth that many German snipers would learn before the war ended. The Americans had never been invisible. They had simply mastered the art of denying the enemy a target. And on the battlefields of Western Europe, that lesson proved just as deadly as any rifle or machine gun.